not forgiving is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So when you forgive, it is absolutely not saying that what the other person did is okay. It's not even saying that you're okay with the other person. It's just saying that you're okay with yourself. And I remember asking a couple of people that I knew had been, that it wasn't romantic relationships, but it was something that they had to forgive. And I asked them their strategy. And like the first one didn't really work for me. Second one didn't really work for me. And then someone introduced me to that Hawaiian Ho'oponopo. And in that, and I did a version of it that may not be the most traditional one. But for me, what I had to do was say, thank you, I'm sorry, I love you, I forgive you, I release you, to the person and people that had, caused me pain. And you have to do it until you absolutely mean it with no reservation. And, there were times where I was like, okay, I have to say I love you to the woman that had an affair with my husband, but I don't love her. So how am I going to do that? And so sometimes I would say, I love you. And then I'd be like, but I don't. Then I moved it to, I love you. I don't know you. I just love you because you're another fellow human being. And then so slowly I managed to rationalize it in my head, but I got myself to the point where I could say all of those phrases about both of them and really mean it. And it was several years afterwards that my first husband, who I'm extremely good friends with now for the record, said to me, I really, really hope that one day you can forgive me. And I said, I did that years ago. And it was true. And it felt really good.
Is it important to ever tell that person, or it doesn't matter?
No.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that being in touch with an ex while you're still healing can delay your healing process?
Yeah, it's too confusing. I think it's definitely possible for people to be friends later, but too early on, if you try to say, oh, we're still going to be friends, it's just very confusing.
I feel like people use it as a crutch to stay in contact.
Yeah. And, interestingly, there was a time that I had to say to my first husband, it's holding me back now from being able to meet anyone else. You're just too much of a comfort blanket for me. And I said, this is with no anger, and you've done nothing wrong, but I need some space from you now.
So do you feel that a conscious uncoupling could work when there's something like betrayal?
What exactly do you mean by a conscious uncoupling? Obviously, I've heard.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's a whole book, but it's essentially, instead of having a clear ending that you're no longer talking, you're speaking to each other about what's showing up for you, and you're processing together, and you're kind of slowly unraveling the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, obviously, if infidelity is suddenly found out, then it's quite hard to do that. But if people are mature enough to realize that a relationship probably is ending, and they want to do that in the best possible way, then I think that could work. Yeah.
Have you heard of this? It's something called post-traumatic betrayal syndrome or something.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It's something around the specific trauma around betrayal.
Yeah.
Because it's your partner is your primary attachment. Mm-hmm. It's the person you're speaking to the most. It's your survival. And then to be betrayed by them, it's the most gaslighting of an experience.
Well, because it's the sexual bond as well. But basically, you're best friends that you've had since childhood. That's obviously a very deep bond where betrayal could hurt a lot, but it doesn't involve the sexual element as well. So it's a sexual rejection as well as a betrayal of the friendship, the marriage, the relationship, etc.
So what advice do you have for people who are, coming out of maybe a betrayal, infidelity, to trust again? Is there any science around how we can train the brain to trust when maybe after we're really on guard, looking for red flags, we're afraid we're going to recreate that same trauma?
Yeah. So time, again, there's, and gathering evidence, there's so many examples of people who have been through something similar, and with time and whatever work they needed to do on themselves, and potentially with therapeutic help as well. And I mean, I'm talking about talking therapy, not medication. Most people get there. So, and it does make me really sad when I see the smaller group of people that I'm aware of who that one incident shuts down their heart and they can never open it up again. We lived in tribes where, most of us really benefit from being in partnership. And I think this is going to sound really hard when you're in the early stages of it, but with time, what you see is that it is a choice. And so at some point you have to make that choice that I know not all people are bad. I know there are people who've been through what I've been through, and I can't take my past experiences and now put it onto someone else who's got nothing to do with that. And, a little bit like you said, in that first year post-divorce, it's so hard with the first birthday, the first Valentine's Day, and it's not quite as hard with the second one. That, okay, let's say the worst case scenario happened again. Let's say you remarry and the person cheats on you again. It's not going to be as bad for you as it was the first time. I don't wish that for you at all, but it's not going to kill you if it happens, and you'll have a stronger boundary for walking away from that in an even better way than you did already.
And I think what it shows you is that you can get through anything in life, and like how resilient you are. And I think sometimes in like first like loves, you have this like naivete of like, this is it forever. And I've cracked the code. And I think what happens in these situations is it opens your eyes to the reality that, over 50% of marriages do end in this, and that life goes on. And then you see people become even more themselves like later on in life because of it. But I think that when it's happening, you feel like it's only you and what did I do? And it's a lot of self-blame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I also think there's like a lot of narrative that's very socially acceptable that, phrases like, it's so difficult to meet men. I don't need a man to pay my bills. What's the point of marriage? I'm just such a like hopeless romantic love bunny that I always say, I love being married. It's not that I can't pay my own bills, but it's nice to share them with someone. And when I say things like that, really like successful women that I know and love, then they actually say, well, actually, yeah, I'd like to be married too. And I just kind of want to make that conversation more okay, because when we become hard, it doesn't help us. It doesn't make us better. It doesn't change anything necessarily about the next relationship that we might get into. But I think it doesn't make you your highest self. I think your highest self is one whose heart is really open.
So with how you mentioned our lifespans are so much longer, do you feel that marriage is still serving most people? Because I feel with marriage, it does put us into this like till death do us part. And I feel like we're just changing so rapidly today that I'm like, and I'm in a question of this for myself too. I'm like, is this really still the model that's working? So I'm curious your thoughts on this.
So I actually went back to my old university to speak on a panel. It was about burnout, but one of the people in the audience did ask about the dating scene for young people, like late teens, early 20s. And I remember thinking, I wouldn't want to be their age now. And so the way she framed the question was very intelligent. She said, people are having children later, they're getting married later, they're staying out of relationships for longer, so they're more likely to be living alone or living like in, flat shares with friends. And there's this, loneliness epidemic and mental health epidemic. And what we discussed very much, as a group, was that we actually think it's going to flip back the other way. So we think it's likely that we'll go to more traditional values of getting married more at like the age that you and I first did, having children earlier again. Yeah. So what happens really, if you look through history, is that it oscillates kind of like this. So, if you compare like the 60s to the 70s or like the 20s to the 30s, and then, the 50s was a very traditional time, followed by quite a wild time. I think it's a very individual question at the moment. I think that really young generation, I feel like I'm really old saying this now, but it just feels like they don't really have relationships. They're very promiscuous. They're not really thinking about marriage for a long time in the future. And I think that's fine if you're really happy with it. For me, I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying that for all women of my age, it's the same thing. But You have to know what's right for you, but also be very sure that it's not driven by unhealed wounds.
Right.
Because betrayal comes back to, one of the most primal wounds that most people have, which is abandonment.
Yeah, I feel that this younger generation has probably seen their parents get divorced and all the different things that they're like, well, this isn't working. But then they flip the other way of like, so I'm just not going to define anything and just be in a situationship. And, and then that ambiguity is really hurtful because it's like, are you choosing me or not? Are you just choosing me until you have the best next option, especially with dating apps? You're exposed, or you perceivingly are exposed to so many people, but it's a mirage. Most of those people you'll never meet, you're not actually compatible with. The conversations don't go very far. And then when you do meet someone, then a lot of them are thinking, well, maybe there's someone better.
Yeah, that's the thing I'm really seeing people experience, is that the feeling of being so disposable because there's so much choice.
Right.
And, some of the things I hear sadly are, well, I go on the apps when I'm feeling really at my worst about myself. And I'm like, come on, girl, isn't that like the worst time to go on the app?
I deleted all of them. I was like, this is doing something to my brain. I mean, they work with neuroscientists, but in a kind of shadow way. Like, I don't know if you've ever been on them, but these apps like Hinge, it puts the people you're most compatible with in this special folder, but you have to pay $2.99 to talk to them. I'm like, what? It's a straight up business, obviously, And then, it's never when you're feeling great that you're like, I'm going to go talk to some strangers on a dating app. It's like,
pay $2.
It's pay $2.99 to start a conversation that's not going to go anywhere. And then I'm curious just the rate of like how many people, and a lot of us, we get in these moods, like back when I would use them. Sometimes you're just in an open mood that you're just like, okay, this person seems interesting. Sure. And then you go back like a day later and you're like, why did I just say, now they've all messaged me and I have to, and then the ghosting happens, So it's like, I've even seen like, because it doesn't feel like a real person on the other end, but it is a real person on the other end. So it is this like, because you don't see them and feel them there, it is this sense of like, you know what, I kind of want out of this conversation. So I'm just going to be like silent and like freeze a response. And like, or what happens often too is like, you'll get maybe more information about the person that you might not like. Like you Google them or you go on their Instagram or you see another picture of them and you're not interested in them anymore. What are you going to say? Your fourth picture, your nose look weird. What are you going to say? So people just ghost. So it's something like 30% of interactions on these apps end with ghosting.
Really? Once hear someone say, I'm not going to name the app because there's a lot more now than there were at that time, but basically say going on this app is like picking through the garbage can on the street outside your house. And I'm not judging anyone that's gone on them, but I have never gone on them and I would never go on them. And particularly because things like this ghosting or this like being judged, very primarily on what you look like, I just can't see how that's ever going to make you feel good about yourself, particularly for women, I think, or particularly for people who are actually looking for something serious, because I get the feeling that there's a lot of people on there that aren't. Yeah.
I would say most people like my age, millennial, Gen Z, a lot of them are just using it to hook up. Maybe I've heard the most successful people on dating apps and websites are the 50 plus crowd, because they're intentional about using it. Yeah, they're like
the Golden Bachelor.
They're having a lot of success on there because it's like they're not putting these filtered photos of themselves and only their best and playing hard to get and playing these games. They're just like, this is what I'm looking for. This is who I am. Here are my weaknesses. Like, do you want to go on a real date with me? And there's like, that's the beauty that technology can bring us. But I think just our generation, it feels almost like an ego hit. I think a lot of the men on there are in relationships, actually. A lot of them are. Because sometimes they post their Instagrams and I go on their Instagrams and then they're pictures with their girlfriends. I'm like, does your girlfriend know you're on this app?
I'm so naive. That is just the most shocking thing.
And I think they just do it for like a vanity thing of like, who can I match with? Oh my gosh, it's
Please, can you cut this out?
It's crazy, yeah. And then on top of that, it like really messes with your perception of like,
how people
humanity, because when I first got on them, you match with someone and I thought it was like I'm talking to a person. So I'm like, oh, I'm excited. I matched with someone. We're talking. And then they like unmatch you. And I'm like, what did I say? What did I do? And it's like, you never know. Like you have
Yeah.
no idea what their story is.
And it may be just that they met someone,
they met
something
someone,
became serious.
Exactly. But then you have your own story. But then what happens is then you stop getting excited and you stop getting excited. You stop getting excited. And then you reach this point that you're on this app, you feel nothing.
So let me tell you how that works. So at first, obviously you get a dopamine hit because it's a reward. But then like with any addiction or substance that you become tolerant to, you need more of it to get the same reward. So then it starts becoming like just less. And then when your dopamine receptors become so oversaturated by having had that reward and then not getting the more that it needs, it actually it can lead to depression, but at minimum, it leads to just feeling very disappointed in life. And the risk of that happening, for me, like my brain is the thing that I make, I wake up thinking about first thing in the morning. And I do my gratitude on my silk pillowcase, like, because I want to put my brain into oxytocin from like first thing in the morning. And I make all of my food choices based on my brain. And I can be a bit like blunt like this. The other day, someone was like, oh, this is the way that Tara talks. But they were saying about their phone and social media and how addictive it is and how much time it wastes. And I said, hang on, guys, this isn't the fault of your phone. This is your fault. So the thought of actually engaging with an app that's going to make me feel depressed and disappointed in life, it just seems like I can't see why I would do that.
Yeah.
I can't see what the actual reward would be. I mean, I guess people will say, oh, the actual reward is you could meet someone that you could marry, but how many frogs are you going to have to kiss before you find a prince that it's actually worth it?
Yeah. And what is it doing to you in the interim?
Yeah.
And changing your perception. I feel with dating, it's all of these like false starts. Like you're excited and then not. And so you have to just have no expectations. But then to have no expectations, it's almost like then you can't even let yourself feel any butterflies or anything because you're so afraid because it's happened so many times that it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's why I honestly just feel like dating is maybe unnatural.